Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishram and I am back with another video. So yeah, you see the title of this video, right? I completed Vlogmas in December and still managed to read 42 books. I don't know who I think I am. I don't know what was going through my head, what I was doing. I still don't know much about December. I think December for me is a complete blur. But 42 books. I promise you I will never do another wrap up like this where I talk about all 42 books in one wrap up. I usually do a mid-month wrap up and a final wrap up, but unfortunately, you know, that's how things go. So before we get started with the video, I am here to talk about Book of the Month. So if you didn't know, Book of the Month is a super popular, fast-growing online book service for readers, and their sole mission is to promote new and emerging authors and to help readers find their next great book. One of the things that I will always say that I admire about Book of the Month is that they make sure that they are not only promoting authors in terms of diversity of race and ethnicity, but also in diversity of genre. So whether that is picking a contemporary romance, picking a thriller, a historical fiction, or nonfiction, they have it all. So the way that Book of the Month actually works is that they have this vetting system where they go through hundreds of books each month and they come up with a curated list of new and early release titles. So early release titles meaning that they do give us as readers the opportunity to read books actually before their release date. And the sole purpose of this is to help readers spend less time researching and more time reading. Book of the Month is risk-free. They have a skip policy which allows you to skip any month and you will not be charged. In addition to this, they have the best prices for new release hardcovers. So new release hardcovers are super expensive, going all the way up to, I've seen some as high as $45. So Book of the Month actually regularly costs only $14.99 a month for a new hardcover release, which is a huge deal. Today, however, I am here to provide you with a code that you can use to get your first book for $9.99. And that code is NEWBOOKS, and I will make sure that I leave that information down in the description box below for you to check out. So let's go ahead and jump in and see what the books are for the month of January. As always, your books will come in this blue Book of the Month box, and they always come with a bookmark, which usually I find to be hilarious. This month's is I'll wait here, you know, like you put the bookmark in, I'll wait here. Yeah, I personally find them really funny, but you could never have enough bookmarks. So the first one that I have here appears to be a thriller, and it is The Survivors by Jane Harper. This is about a man who's made some really reckless decisions that have changed his life forever. He makes a decision to take his family back to this coastal area where he grew up, and his brother appears to be absent. Now I'm not sure whether his brother has died or has been killed or is just missing of his own accord, but while they're there, a body turns up on the beach, and then all of these secrets start coming out. 2021 is a year in which I am going to be reading more thrillers, so I'm excited to have this one. The next one that I have here is Outlawed by Anna North, and this is a book that takes place in 1864, and it seems to have a Western feel to it, which I've never read a book that has Western vibes. And it is about a woman who lives in this town and she cannot have children, and what ends up happening is that women who can't have children end up being killed as if they're witches. So she decides to join this outlaw group called the Hole in the Wall Gang, which I have so many funny tickly feelings about that name, and they decided to make some really crazy decisions that put them all at risk, but I believe that it's all for the sake of creating an environment for women to be safe. I'm really curious about what type of commentary is going to go on in this book, especially commentary about fertility, since the women in this book are killed if they cannot bear children. The next one that I have here is The Dating Plan by Sarah Sarah Desai, and this is the follow-up, and I don't think they're necessarily related, but this is the follow-up to The Marriage Game, which I did read in 2020 and I did end up liking. So I'm excited, really excited to have this one. This is a marriage of convenience story in which our main heroine is a software designer or a software engineer, one of the two, and she has no interest in love, and her family keeps trying to match her up in order to make sure she gets married. And then our hero is trying to get his inheritance, but in order to do that he actually has to get married. So they decide to marry each other as a way to satisfy both of their families. I'm sure this is a story where they start off as friends, marriage of convenience, and then it goes from there. I'm excited to see what she's going to do with this book because I did end up enjoying The Marriage Game, like I said before. The next one that I have here is The Removed by Brandon Hobson, and this is one that I'm excited for all of these this month, to be quite honest with you, but this one is one that I'm super excited for because I want to make sure that I am continuing my read of Native and Indigenous works. And this book is written, like I said, by Brandon Hobson, who is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and this is about a Native family that loses a family member, and what ends up happening is there seems to be this cross between the spirit world and the real world, and it's based on Cherokee folklore, and it has a huge family dynamic, and I just feel like this one is going to be really good. So yes. So the next one that I have here is one that I recently found out about, and I fell in love with the description, super excited about the conversations are going to happen in this one. So I was so ecstatic to see this in the box, but it is The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. And this one is about two enslaved men who are in love. They have a union, and their relationship is seen as a norm on the plantation until another slave feels like he can profit off of preaching certain texts from the Bible to other slaves on the plantation, and then what was seen as a normal relationship ends up being categorized as evil and wrong. And I think that this is so interesting because there's a lot of conversations about how slaves were introduced to Christianity, and I think that Robert Jones is going to maybe comment on this a little bit, so I'm interested in seeing where this goes. This sounds like it's going to be so great. All right, y'all, so those are the 5 books for the January book of the month picks. As I said, if you're interested in checking out book of the month, that code and a link to get to book of the month will be down in the description box below. As always, thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Okay, y'all, so about these 42 books, as always, before I begin, I do my stats. So okay, it's gonna be a lot, and the way that I'm gonna do this video is not the way that I typically do it. So usually I do my videos in chronological order, so I tell you the books that I've read in the order that I read them. However, so I went on Twitter and I asked how everyone would like to see me structure this video, and the most common response that I was getting was by star rating. I got a few genres and then star ratings within genres, but the complexity in which that would take for me to organize the information which is gonna take too long, and I did not have the time because I definitely wanted to get this video out sooner than later. So we're just gonna go, like I said, by star rating, and then within that star rating I'll tell you about the books that I read. If there's any series that are together within a star rating, I'll review them together, if that makes sense. So in the month of December, I read 42 books. This came to a total of 7,135 pages. So clearly a lot of the books that I was reading in December were a lot of graphic works and a lot of novellas, which is why that page count is not higher in reference to the number of books that I have read. In terms of genre, I read 20 romance/contemporary, 13 manga, graphic novels, and comics, 3 science fiction and fantasy, 2 realistic fiction, 1 street lit, which is going to be a new category for 2021, 1 picture book, expect these numbers to go up this year. 1 nonfiction and 1 classic. In terms of age categorization, 2 were targeted at children, 2 were for a middle grade audience, 1 was for a young adult audience, and 37 were for an adult audience. So I think that for 2021, I really want to see a little bit more even disbursement of these numbers in terms of age categorization. I would love to see a little bit more half and half going on, but we'll just see how it goes. In terms of format, 11 I listened to on audio, 9 were physical books, and 22 were ebooks. I'm very, very shocked at these numbers. Usually my audiobook number is a tad bit higher, but this month it definitely was a heavy physical and ebook, which I'm just as shocked as the next person, to be quite honest with you. 13 of these were read on Kindle Unlimited. 4 were read from Comixology, which is going to be a new category because I now have Comixology, which is tied in some ways, but then not really, to Kindle Unlimited. I will have to explain this later, but I do have Comixology. 11 were checked out from the library. 12 were owned, which is so good. We love to see that. 2 were from Libro FM, and 4 were ARCs, or books that were sent to me by authors / publishers. In terms of the other stats that I keep track of, I think that moving forward this year, you're going to see these stats be a little bit more technical instead of so broad. But just for this last month of 2020, I kept it the same as I had in other months. I read 10 translated works, and that is solely attributed to the amount of manga that I read this month. 33 were own voices or diverse books. 19 were written by Black authors. 2 had LGBTQIA plus representation, and none were over 500 pages, which I'm hoping in 2021 we will change that. I've already finished a book that was over 500 pages for the month of January, so we're doing okay so far. So in terms of star rating, I really definitely decided to gear more towards books that I enjoyed for the month of December, which is why I had no 1 star, no 2 star, no 2.5 stars. So we only have 3 stars and higher, which is great because I really did just mood read for the month of December. Like, that was my goal, and my aim was to just enjoy myself in the month of December because it was the last month. So like I said, we only have 3 stars and higher. So I have 9 books that I rated 3 stars, 6 books that I rated 3.5 stars, 20 books that I rated 4 stars, 1 book that I rated 4.5 stars, and 5 books that I rated 5 stars. Okay, so once I figured out all my star ratings and I did the calculation for the average, it was 3.75. So overall, a pretty solid reading month. I think that November I actually had a higher average rating, but I read more books this month, and a lot more of those books fell into the 3-star and 3.5 star range. In terms of year published, 2 were published in 2021, and that is because of 2 arcs that I read. 14 were published in 2020, 12 were published in 2019, 2 were published in 2018, 2 were published in 2017, 2 were published in 2016, 1 was published in 2015, 1 was published in 2013, 1 was published in 2012, 1 was published in 2011, 2 were published in 2010, 1 was published in 2007, and 1 was published in 1843. Which was the classic that I read. I still am skewing a little bit more heavily to newly released titles. I want to make sure that I even that out, where I am reading as many backlists as those that are newer titles. So the first one that I am going to cover falls into our 3-star range. I'll make sure that there are the cards broken up in the comments below. That way, if you want to kind of check out based on star rating, you can do that. The first one that I have here is A Feast for the Senses by Nicole Falls, and this is part of Nicole Falls's like holiday shorts, and this was probably my least favorite one to date. So I typically enjoy all of them. I think the first 3 in this series I have all given 4 stars to, and this one I only gave 3 stars to. It's based off of a hero who gets a second chance to date the heroine. They had an opportunity before, but he missed out on it, just being foolish and not taking the opportunity. So his sister kind of sets them up where they both end up at the same cabin together. So once again, we are seeing another trip of like forced proximity, and they end up, of course, kind of feeling each other out and seeing where they stand in terms of their feelings. I expected a little bit more from Nicole Falls with this one. I typically think that she starts her books off with such a bang. This one really fell short for me, and it didn't do what I wanted it to do, and it was super less steamy than the other ones that I am used to reading from her. When we got to the climax of their relationship, where we get that moment of intimacy, it fell super flat and it just didn't feel enjoyable. I didn't feel a connection. I felt like they were disconnected, and I just anticipated getting a little bit more from this book. So I'm hoping that she does more in these holiday shorts, but I'm hoping also that she goes back to the format that she was using in the previous 3 books in this series. After that, I have Fairest of All, which is the first book in the Whatever After series by Sarah Milanowski. I have read this book 3 times now. This read was my 3rd time reading this book, and I keep rereading in hopes of continuing the series. It's about a brother-sister duo who moved to this new town, and they end up finding this mirror in their basement, and this mirror takes them to different fairy tale places. This first one, of course, is a Snow White retelling, but when they get to these lands, what ends up happening is they accidentally mess up the story as it's originally told. And a lot of this has to do with the said princess of the book not following the stereotypical role that she is used to following, meaning that, like in this instance for Snow White, not waiting for the prince to save her and kind of reversing the roles, which I think is really unique, especially for a children's book series. And it just chronicles their adventures. They're really short. None of them exceed 200 pages. I think most of them actually fall within the 100 to 150 page range because they are children's books. But I started listening to this because I think in 2021 I want to go ahead and close out this series. It's 13 books long, but the audiobooks are 3 to 4 hours long. They're easy reads, so I decided to reread in hopes, like I said, of pushing on and going forward in the series. The next one that I have in the 3-star range is Sated on the Beach by Rhiannon Burnett, and this one is one that I randomly found on KU. I was looking for a little bit more, I don't want to say paranormal because I don't know if you would put this in this category, but more of like weird type of romances, but really heavily focusing on a black character with the identity of the other being black as well. And this one definitely fit what I was looking for, and it is about a woman really who just goes on vacation and she ends up having a sexual experience with a merman, and there's not much to the story. It's not about building this plot. It's really short. It really is just about her experience. And if you have any questions about how mer people are able or capable of, you know, I would check this one out. And this one doesn't have an HEA or an HFN. I think it literally was just solely focused on that experience. There is a second book in the series which I do need to pick up, and it's about her making her journey back to the island, and I'm hoping that there is a more intense experience, because when this one ends, there was kind of a reference that she may have an encounter with a mermaid as well as a merman, like at the same time. So I want to see how that's gonna work. So the next one that I have here is one that was sent to me by the author, and this is an indie published one-shot comic, and it is Squad Goals by Shaquetta Smith. And I was really interested in receiving this one from the author because of the fact that it was a black woman comic book writer, and the diversity on the cast that created this comic, they're all BIPOC individuals. So I really wanted to read it. And this is about a group of young women who all commit various crimes, and they end up going to this detention center, and while they're at this detention center they have to spend their time on a cheerleading squad. So they bring in a woman who was previously part of a cheerleading squad at another high school, which she comes into coach, and it really just is about their journey in becoming a team and building that rapport with each other and being confident in themselves and not seeing themselves as criminals or these people who are not good because they made mistakes. I enjoyed it, but I gave it 3 stars because I felt like there was a lot missing with the plot, and I understand that this was a one-shot, but this just could have been a great introduction to another series. It literally leaves the reader feeling like, where's the rest? Which I enjoy when I know that there is, you know, more issues or more volumes to follow, but it becomes kind of hard to really enjoy something like this when there's nothing left. And then I had a little bit of trouble connecting to the art in some of the frames, and I think that this was because this is a sport-based comic, so there needs to be a lot of movement within the art style, and it felt very stagnant in quite a few of the frames. It felt like characters were literally like placed on the frame, and I don't know if I'm really describing this right, but whenever you see comics or manga or graphic novels that are usually sport based, you feel the movement of the characters, or you feel the movement as you go from frame to frame. With this one, I didn't really feel the movement. It just literally felt like I was going from frame to frame and the characters were just placed within that panel, and for me that was difficult as an avid comic book reader because I'm used to seeing something completely different. And I will preface this by saying too that this comic definitely has more of the feel of a web comic than a traditional comic, so keep that in mind if you do decide to pick it up, and I believe that it is available on KU. So the next book that I have on my list is Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellfleur. I believe that's how you say their last name. I'm not even sure. And Written in the Stars appealed to me because it had been described as a story that is not only sapphic, that takes place in Seattle, but also has Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones' Diaries elements tied into it, and I was super excited to pick it up, and I did end up giving it 3 stars. And I just want to preface this by saying that 3 stars for me is not a bad book. I think that sometimes we get this misconception that 3 stars means that a book is bad, and that's not true. I gave this book 3 stars. For me, 3 stars is a solid book, but it just was not one that I found was done well enough to give it higher. And so this focuses on 2 characters, Elle and Darcy, who make the decision to fake date after they meet on a blind date that absolutely went horrible. Of course, our main character Darcy does have a lot of characteristics that are based on Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, so I wasn't really surprised by their uptight, standoffish attitude. And I like that Darcy was paired with Elle because Elle definitely had a more carefree, relaxed type of nature, and we really do get to see them work with each other in a way that they are a great support system, where Elle comes from a family that doesn't really respect what she's doing. She's creating, or has been creating, a lot of content on her Twitter, and it's based off of the fact that she's an astrologer, and the Twitter account is called Oh My Stars, and a lot of it has to do with dating based off of your astrological signs. And I found that part to be really, really cool, and a lot of things that Elle said were just really poetic and definitely quotable. But I found the book itself to be very predictable, and it just was not a book for me that packed a punch. And it wasn't that I didn't care, it just was so middle of the road to the point that I would find myself becoming easily distracted. I would have to make sure that I was rereading sections over and over again because I just couldn't get into the story. Even when we got to the familial conflict, a lot of it was just predictable. So it was one of those stories where I was like, this was a good story, but either way, like it didn't really affect me in any way. And I'm not saying that every book that I read has to give me this emotional punch in which I feel super connected to the story, but I just didn't feel really either way about this story. It wasn't the best story that I've read, and it wasn't the worst story that I read. There were elements of it that I really, really appreciated and really did enjoy, but overall the level of predictability that was incorporated into this book in terms of the plot just made it a less than read for me. but I'm excited to see what else that this author is going to do. I think that for me this is a good starting place, but I'm hoping that in future books we have some of the same unique elements, like the astrology elements, and kind of incorporating personality traits based on really pop culture icons. Darcy and Bridget Jones are both pop culture icons. I think that incorporating stuff like that is really, really cool, but you have to have a plot that follows with it. The next one that I have here is one of the many manga that I read this month, and it is Miss Kozumi Loves Ramen Noodles by Narumi. And this literally is a manga about a high school girl who loves ramen, and it definitely, I think, could possibly have some sapphic elements to it. There is another main character that clearly has strong feelings for her, but we get to learn a lot about ramen in this, and I really enjoyed it. Like, I've never had ramen from a proper ramen noodle shop, and I have just been completely engrossed with the amount of ramen that I learned about in this short little volume. I thought it was interesting, but it doesn't really go past that. It doesn't really go past just the discussion of ramen, but it definitely is worth a read and one that I definitely want to continue with. The next one that I read was My Boss's Kitten, Volume 1 by Yumi Hisawa, and this is another one that I read. I was trying to do the 25 days of manga, but I think I only completed 10 volumes of manga, so maybe this year, if 25 days of manga happens again, maybe this will be the year that I actually get to complete it. But I read this one because I can't remember whose channel I saw this one, but this is a smutty manga that deals with a young woman who actually was, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, like, she was left at the altar, or he decided that he no longer wanted to marry her. She was engaged, and then he actually is a divorcee and he's her boss, but they kind of cross paths when she ends up losing the house that she was supposed to live in with her fiance, and it ends up with them kind of shacking up, but not necessarily like in a relationship, shacking up in the fact that he's helping her have some place to live until she can find somewhere else to live on her own. And of course, romance ensues, and I think that going into this one, I thought that it was going to be a little bit just more smutty than what it was, in terms of, like, I thought it was just like smut, but this one actually tackled quite a few difficult topics, which I was very, very surprised by, especially when we're talking about divorcing and the breakup of a relationship and the emotional impact that that has. And I enjoyed it enough. Like I said, it was a 3-star read that I do want to end up picking up the next volume. My last 3-star read of the month of December was The 12 Dates of Christmas by Rilzy. I always want to say Risley, but it's Rilzy, I believe, Adams. And this is the first book in the Love on the Rock series, and I was slightly disappointed with this. Like, I was super excited because I know that a lot of people in 2020 were checking out Go Deep and absolutely loved it, and I haven't read that one yet, but I was looking for holiday romances, and this was one that I ended up reading and thought that I was going to enjoy. And oh my gosh, the main character of this book was so frustrating, so frustrating. This is a second chance romance and a friends to lover romance, and it is about Zia and Rashad, who ended up becoming friends with benefits. So they were best friends when they were younger. They ended up becoming friends with benefits, and then Zia kind of like cuts him off, and she ends up dating other people, and at the beginning of this book she's getting out of a really, really crappy relationship. And I mean, he says the stereotypical things that guys say when you're not affected by their bull, and some of it was hurtful to her, I think. But anyway, what ends up happening is that her and Rashad end up reconnecting, and he wants to prove within 12 dates that they can be more than their physical relationship. Zia was so aggravating. I have never met a main character in a romance that was as aggravating as Zia, and simply because everything that Rashad was doing. Like, he literally did everything right. Everything right. No hesitancy, no question, no nothing. She turned him down the entire book. I mean, literally the entire book up into the final couple of pages, it felt like. And it was unwarranted. I understand having like a hesitant feeling at first, especially because she had gotten out of a pretty crappy relationship, but the consistency in which she continued to turn this man down, I was telling Rashad in my head, just leave her. Just don't even put any more effort, because it's just completely not worth it at this point. I think that the reason why this book got 3 stars is because I liked Rashad as a character and the writing was excellent. I think that is what saved this book. It makes me very, very nervous to read more books and see character development, because if this is like a staple in terms of characters from Real Z Adams, I am going to be super frustrated in my reading of their backlist. But I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series, because the second book is based on a secondary character, and it was kind of obvious when you saw the cover for the second book that it was going to be based on this character. But I'm not sure if I want to finish it, but I may. I don't know. I haven't completely decided yet. But yeah, 3-star for me. Okay, so on to our 3.5 category. So the first one that I have in this category is From Scratch by Katrina Jackson. This is the first book in the Welcome to Seaport series, which I was excited to start because I've been hearing so much in 2020 about Katrina Jackson. And this is a polyamorous MF romance, and it focuses on a heroine who moves to this small town after leaving her career in teaching and decides to take up baking, and she meets a police officer and a fireman, and they both are into her, and then they are both into each other. And when I say like this book is steamy, it is super, super steamy, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed in terms of level of steaminess. It was done very, very well. However, I think I only ended up giving this one 3.5 stars because there were some aspects of the writing that I didn't vibe with in terms of creating a plot and a story. I think the pacing was extremely off, especially towards the end of the novel, in which we found out this conflict that seemingly kind of just came out of left field. It didn't make sense because there was no indication of it whatsoever throughout the entire novel, and it read like a first draft. I think that if the pacing would have been fixed, and if we would have gotten a little bit more development, and if that conflict that was present at the end of the book actually had some indications of existing throughout the rest of the book, I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I am interested in checking out the rest of the series, and I am interested in checking out more of Katrina Jackson's works, but this one for me was a solid 3.5. Like I said, the steaminess was on point. I think that the relationship that existed between our 3 main characters was really perfect. It does feel a little insta-lovey, but it doesn't really bother me, so that may be something that bothers other people. My issues, like I said, were more so in terms of plot development and pacing. The next one that I have is In Bed with a Highlander, and this is the first book in the McCabe trilogy, and this one is by Maya Banks. Now, I've heard of Maya Banks as a writer before, I just have never read any of her works. This was the first of, I think, 4 historicals that I ended up picking up in the month of December, and this one is about a woman by the name of Marin, who appears to be this highly desired individual because of her relation to someone else in power, and I can't remember if this was in the description, so I don't want to say like who she's like related to, but we enter this novel in the beginning of her out in hiding, and she is brutally abused in the beginning, so I would definitely list that as a trigger warning. It was crazy, but she ends up helping this little boy who ends up being the son of our hero Ewan, and it ends up being like a transfer. So she gets out of the grips of one clan to end up in the grips of another clan, and she is in a forced marriage, or it's a it is a forced marriage. in which she has to adjust to being married. And it is, I don't want to say it's a forced marriage because she agrees to get married, but it's a marriage in which she has to become accustomed. I forget the right term for that trope, but she has to get accustomed to being married to Ewan. And it was so interesting watching them get adjusted to each other and having to navigate their personalities. What I loved about Marin is that she's very outspoken, has a sharp tongue, stands up for herself. And I think that she challenges Ewan, who is not used to seeing that in women. And when she's there and she is, you know, the wife of the clan leader, she definitely plays her role well and stands up for things that I think that Ewan is proud of her for standing up for. But of course there's certain things that he kind of has to like say no to or put his foot down because he is the leader of the clan and he believes in this certain structure in which everyone should follow in terms of keeping them both safe because of the level of respect that he needs in order to provide her and the rest of the clan with safety. I don't know if that makes sense, but their dynamic was really, really interesting. Now, there was one scene which I'm not going to talk about. I do talk about it in my review on Goodreads, and it is a spoiler, which is why I don't want to talk about it too much. There is a scene that is not, it's not rape, it's not non-consensual sex. It is a scene in which I think I just feel like some things were interestingly done the way it was written, and I just had certain feelings about that. If you want to know more about how I felt about that scene, it is in that Goodreads review, and I don't know necessarily if it affected my rating, but I did want to discuss it because I know it's not something that everyone discusses in their review, but it's one that I felt something about in particular. Like I said, it's not non-consensual, it's not rape, but I think that for me personally, I think it might have been a slight trigger on my end, and I'm not sure if that's what it was. But overall, I thought that the writing was good. I think that I didn't enjoy some of the alpha characteristics of Ewan. I think I'm learning that alpha characters are not always my thing. Sometimes they are. I think it depends on the context of the story and how I'm feeling about it, whether I will allow a hero to slide with those alpha-like characteristics. So for me, it's very, very like contingent, and in this story I really didn't like his alpha male characteristics, and I also felt like the ending just came and went too quickly. So there's a lot of build up to what could possibly happen to Marion when people figure out like who she's connected to and how that could affect Ewan's clan and how that relationship can affect others who are trying to have some type of alliance with Ewan's clan. And I thought that that dynamic was really, really interesting. I was here for it. However, I think that it just resolved like that. Like, it almost felt like it never happened. And to have such a heavy buildup, it was kind of a disappointment to get to the point where it was like, dang, like I wish that we had a little bit more pacing in terms of getting to that resolution. It just went too quickly. So after that, I did end up rating also My American Duchess by Eloisa James, a 3.5 stars. So this is my first Eloisa James book, and it was hilarious, and it was hilarious in a good way. So this actually focuses on an American heiress who ends up going to England in order to find a suitor, and she is actually in the beginning of this book engaged to one character and ends up meeting that character's twin brother. So I was like, how is this gonna work? I don't understand how in the world this is going to work, because, you know, the character that she ends up meeting is Trent, and they have an interesting conversation, but of course she's already engaged, and then there's some things that happen that allow their relationship to occur or allow them to explore more. Now, there are a couple of things that I didn't expect going into this novel. This novel is not a book that ends in an HEA. This is a book that explores what happens after a marriage occurs. And I was not used to that. So that was a quick adjustment, because when we got to certain points, I was like, why do I have so much of this book left? And then I realized that we were going to explore some dynamics after a marriage occurs. Now, I think that it ended up being a little too long. This one, for me, dragged out a little too much. I like the character dynamic that we were getting, where Trent was very much against being in love and like loving someone. He was all about having companionship, friendship, and having a sexual relationship with Mary, but he was not really into the idea of falling in love with Mary. And that I found very intriguing, because she very much so wanted to be in love. Prior to their relationship, we find out that Mary is finding a suitor because she had 2 failed previous engagements. So in Trent's eyes, he's kind of like, you think that you're in love, but you're probably not, because you've already been engaged twice. And I think it's just about what happens after you get married to someone and maintaining that relationship. But it was just so long to, and I felt like this minor conflict that happens at the end just was unneeded. It just felt like it was just put in there for the sake of putting it in there, and I just didn't feel any type of way towards. I was like, did we need another conflict to create a romantic situation? Because at this point, I feel like we didn't. And it just didn't work well in my eyes. But this book is steamy, y'all. I was reading this on a live show, and I was laughing as I was reading because it just shocked me. It really shocked me, because it was just like, oh my gosh, like they were having sex at one point, and it just felt like they just kept having sex over and over and over again. And I'm like, I'm here for it. But I think I was just shocked. I was shocked. And then some of the language in here is hilarious. Like, I just found it so funny. Like, we were using some interesting terminology to describe like human anatomy, like gooseberries and Milky Way, and it was just it's just hilarious. It was so funny. I literally was laughing out loud at certain points of this book. But I think had it been shorter, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But I did enjoy it enough to want to check out more of Eloisa James. So here we are with the Gooseberry book. So the next 2 books that I read are actually part of a series, and that is the New Year Bay Solutions series, in which a group of Black indie romance authors got together and they decided to write a series of books leading up to New Year's Day. These books do not have to be read in any type of order, because the only thing that connects them is the fact that New Year's Eve and New Year's Day are parts of the themes of the book. So it's a thematic connection and not necessarily a character connection. And the 2 that I read that I gave 3.5 stars, the first one is 7 Month Drought, which is a friends to lovers romance in which our hero and heroine end up making a bet, and our hero has to abstain from having sex for 7 months. They're best friends, so she's constantly over at his house, and he's clearly attracted to her, she's attracted to him. And this one read like a slow burn romance, but what bothered me about it so much is that by the time we got to the climax of the 2 of them getting together, it was so underwhelming. Like, I think that I enjoy this one not solely because of their romance, but there were some really interesting side characters. This side character by the name of Mika, who is hilarious. I mean, so hilarious. And like, there were chapters in this novella that were like quoting Mika and another side character, and I would actually love to see a story about Mika and this side character. I think they would be just an interesting duo. But yeah, this one I gave 3.5 stars to, because the anticlimactic resolution to everything, it was just so like underwhelming. I was like, we did all of that pining for this, because it just wasn't it. And the second one is 6 More Minutes, and this one is by A.C. Arthur, and this one is about Miles and Gemma, who previous to this book, I think they actually made an appearance in a previous book of A.C. Arthur's, which I think is like the Donovan family series, which I actually just got the first book in that series. And I believe that this one is based off of them being in a different book. I don't know which book it is, but they had made an agreement in which they would have a physical relationship. They'll meet up a few times a year, get it on, and then that would be it. But they meet up this time around the holidays, specifically New Year's, and Gemma decides that she wants a little bit more from Miles, and Miles of course is hesitant because they've made this agreement, and he's like, no, I'm not really feeling it. I think I respected Gemma because she was willing to accept Miles's no, even even with her breaking the contract of what they had already set up. But for me, the issue that I had with this one was that I felt as though the story was off, that we were literally jumping into the second book in a series, which for me is a problem. I think that an author can write a book in which two characters have already been introduced, but it still reads as though it is the first book in a series. This one read as if we were missing certain aspects of the book, which I do not like. It was steamy. I really like the characters, but it left me in moments where I'm like, I feel like I should know something that I don't know, which is never good when you are writing a standalone novella in which your readers probably don't have any knowledge of the characters that you are mentioning in the book. And the last one that I have in this category is The Heiress Effect by Courtney Milan. This is the second book in the Brother Sinister series, which doesn't have to be read in order. This was part of the TBR swap that I ended up doing with Bethany. So if you're interested in seeing my direct thoughts on this book, make sure you check out that video, which I'll link in the card symbol above. This will be the only time that I link it above, but I will make sure that I leave it in the description box below, because there's going to be 3 other books that are going to appear in this wrap up that are closely related to that vlog. Okay, so we have 24-star books to go through, so we're going to try to make this as quick as possible because I know that this video is already long. So the first one that I have here is The Way the House Has Been by Kosuke Uno. I'm probably saying that so wrong. So The Way the House Has Been is another manga that I read in December, hoping to do the 25 days of manga, and this is about a ex-gangster who has now married and is living with his partner, and this is basically told in like vignettes or short stories just about his experiences in being a house husband, taking care of the household and running errands and doing a lot of different things. So there doesn't appear to be a overarching plot going on just yet, but I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. It's hilarious. I think he's funny, and you could see how some of his things that he's done in his mob life have affected him trying to live a mob free life, and it's funny. Like, he's just a funny character. I'm excited to continue on with the rest of the series. I'm currently reading volume 2, so if you're looking for a humorous manga to check out, I would recommend The Way of the House Has Been. The next book that I read in December was A Christmas Carol. Now this is the bind up that has the chimes and the cricket on the hearth as well, but I read A Christmas Carol for our Patreon buddy read of the month. So we read A Christmas Carol, and then we ended up live streaming the movie together, which was a absolute fun time. We watched the Disney adaptation that has Jim Carrey in it, which is the CGI version. It was hilarious. We had a lot of fun watching it. I enjoyed A Christmas Carol. I believe that everybody's pretty much familiar with the story. I think I enjoyed this. This is my first time reading it because of the amount of detail, and there were funny moments in this. I think we get the opportunity to see how awful Scrooge is as a person and the amount of things that he has to go through in order to change his life. And I think that Dickens was definitely making some commentary about how different classes were treated during the holiday season, and having that love and kindness for all of mankind, no matter what social class they came from. And it really is a insight to how the impoverished were treated during this time. So there's a lot that's going into this. There's a lot of complexities with the 3 ghosts that we see: Ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future. And of course, we all know Scrooge learns his lesson at the end of the book. But it was great actually reading this on page. I will say that the Disney CGI version really does stay true to the text. There are some parts that they, of course, omitted for the sake of time, but I think that they, for the most part, did keep true to it. I will say one of the interesting things about Dickens' writing style, which I haven't read Dickens in a long time. I think the last thing that I read from Dickens probably was Great Expectations, and I don't really remember what his writing style is like, but when I read this one, I saw that he was very intrusive in his writing, meaning that he was really talking to you as a reader, and some parts of it were very conversational. Some parts of it were very much so written as if he was sitting down and telling you a story, which I really did enjoy. I didn't know how I was going to feel about it when I first started reading, but I really did enjoy like kind of like his outside commentary in addition to being the narrator of the story. The next one that I read was Arcade and the Triple T Token, and this one is by Rashad Jennings, and this is the first book in the Coin Slot Chronicles, and this focuses on our main character by the name of Arcade, who has recently just moved to New York with his family, and he's about to attend a new school. Arcade loves the library, which was a plus, and he ends up getting this token from this strange woman, and he ends up experiencing these really strange adventures, which I thought were really cool because they had a school assignment in which they had to come up with a career that they would want to follow, and the things that the coin does, which I won't get into, closely parallel the project that the kids are working on. I loved that there was a strong emphasis on family relationships. Arcade and his sister get along very, very well, and this was just a good book to read as a middle grade read where we see a black boy just enjoying life. There was no trauma elements, there was nothing like serious. I mean, there is a trigger warning for some slight bullying, but I mean, there wasn't like this huge social commentary, which I do enjoy, but it was nice also to read a middle grade book that had a black boy as the main character, in which we didn't necessarily have to worry about that. So I really enjoyed this one. I will be continuing on with the series. I think the entire series is on audiobook on Hoopla, so I'll be listening to them through that. After that, I have 2 volumes of manga, Drops of God Volume 1 and Volume 2. I just recently finished Volume 3, and this manga series is slept on, okay? So I found out about this manga series through Comixology, and I was like, okay, I'm looking for like more food-based manga once again, because of course, why would I not? And this one was solely specific on like on wine, so it was solely focused on wine is what I'm trying to say, not solely specific, but it's solely focused on wine. And I was like, I like to drink wine, but I don't know if I want to read a manga series all about wine, because I'm sure it's going to get detailed. It's so good. It's so good. I have never wanted to experiment and try and learn more about the process in winemaking and how it grows until I read this manga. It is so amazing watching these characters. So the basis of this manga series is that we have a main character by the name of Shizuku. I had to look down because I wanted to make sure I got his name right. And he is the son of a famous wine critic by the name of Kanzaki. And what ends up happening is that Kanzaki ends up passing away. It's not a spoiler, it's in the summary. And he, in order to get his father's estate, he actually has to compete with this other guy who is a up-and-coming wine critic. He is, I believe, following in the footsteps of Kanzaki, and he is adopted by Kanzaki, and the two of them have to compete to find the 12 apostles, which are the 12 best wines, or identify the 12 best wines in his father's collection, and they are considered the drops of God. And it's so crazy because while I was like, okay, this is gonna get super, super boring because we're continuously just talking about wine, talking about wine, talking about wine. But it's like that huge challenge, and then there's many challenges along the way. So we have like this overarching plot and then mini plots that are in each volume. And I've just finished volume 3, like I said, and I'm like, I'm not bored yet, which is a good sign, because sometimes in some manga series some elements can get kind of redundant. Even in my favorite series, Food Wars, there are elements about that series that have gotten really, really redundant, which is why I do feel like that series came to an end at 36 volumes, some of the 36 or 8 volumes. This one is not redundant at all just yet. Granted, I'm only at the 4th volume, but so far so good. It is so good, y'all. If you've never heard of Drops of God or you've never read it, please check. Next, I read a graphic novel called Surviving the City, and this is by Tasha Spillett and also Natasha Donovan, and this is written by an indigenous author, and this is about 2 young girls who are living in a Canadian city. I don't think it says where exactly. This is a graphic novel that focuses on the young women, girls, and two-spirited individuals that go missing in indigenous communities, and it specifically talks about that experience. And I really don't even want to go past that point in describing it because it's super short. It's only I believe like maybe 52 pages long, and in describing it I think that I would give a little bit of the elements away, but it is about these two girls by the name of Des and Miquan, and Des is going through some issues because she can't stay with her grandmother who has diabetes. Like, they're actively trying to take her away, which, I mean, if we think about it in the grand scheme of things, like, diabetes is a manageable disease, and they refuse to let Des stay with her grandmother because she's a diabetic, and Des doesn't want to go to a group home, so she ends up disappearing, going missing. And of course there's some conversation about all of that stuff, and it is affecting Quan heavily because of the fact that her mother also went missing. So she goes on this journey to help rediscover where her friend is, and she relies on some spiritual help. So definitely check this one. I believe that the second volume is already out, and that second volume kind of goes into Des's identity and her trying to figure out whether she's two-spirited or not. The next one that I have is another book in the New Year Bay Resolution series, and this is 8 Naughty Nights by Nicole Falls. So I read a lot of Nicole Falls this month. I think I read like 3 Nicole Falls books this month. And this one specifically focuses on two main characters who go to this resort, and they end up instantaneously being attracted to each other, and they end up hooking up. And it was so interesting, written in true Nicole Falls fashion. I mean, we literally start off with a bang. And the other book that I have on this list of hers literally too starts off with a bang. And the two of them end up spending a lot of time together at the resort, and they have to make the decision on whether they want to be together or not, and whether they want to get to know each other after the fact. This one was just really good, really steamy. I love the romance between the two main characters. This was what I was looking for from Nicole Falls, so this is definitely probably going to end up being my favorite out of the series. I haven't finished the series yet, but this one is definitely sizing itself up to be my favorite. The next one that I have is another one in that series, and it's 5 Midnight Moments, and this is by Cheryl Lister. So this one is about two characters, Val and Dwayne, who have this secret relationship going on, and it's because Val technically worked for Dwayne at this firm, and she starts to become hesitant at the fact that their relationship is so secret. She wants something a little bit more, and Dwayne is like, okay, well, let me prove to you that this is just not a hookup. Like, give me 5 midnight moments to prove to you that I look at you differently. And this one wasn't this one was good, but let me tell you, like, the shining moment of this book was a conflict that literally started in the beginning of the book, which I didn't even see it coming, but there was a conflict. Let me rephrase that. I saw the conflict coming, but I did not see the climax of that conflict playing out the way that it did, and it was hilarious. It was hilarious. So this is an office romance, and it technically is a forbidden romance because of the parameters of their workplace environment, but I did end up enjoying this one, and I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. So the next one that I have here is A Little Stuffing by Ashley Nicole, and I've read Ashley Nicole before, but I think it was this novella that made me realize that she has a great sense of humor. Like, she is great at writing humor in her romance books, and this one focuses on two characters that they're not really friends, but they know each other because our heroine is a friend of the family that our hero is a part of. So they talk a little bit at Thanksgiving, and our hero has recently broken up with his ex, and they decide to have like a one-night stand. And with the way that this ending, I was like, oh gosh, I really want another one. Like, why don't I have like more from these two characters? Because the romance between them was just really good, and I definitely could have seen like more coming from the two of them. So it was ironic that this year Ashley actually ended up having a release of a new book that did have these two characters in it, which is going to appear in my 5-star reads. So if you're looking for like a cute one night stand, I definitely would check this one out, but just do know that the characters get another story later on. Okay, so I actually lied. I think I read 4 books from Nicole Falls this year, or last month. Yeah, 4 books. Okay, so the next one that I read from Nicole Falls is actually Noelle the First, which is the first book in the Holiday Sisters series. And this is a series that follows, I believe, 3 or 4 sisters. And this first one is focused on Noelle, who really liked the holiday season because it was surrounded by her birthday. But as she got older, I believe that either one of her parents or both her parents passed away. I can't remember, but the dynamic changes nevertheless. And she's not as into the holiday season as she used to be. And then she has an old friend that comes back into town for the holiday season, and he tries to get her back in the holiday spirit. And of course, part of that has to do with him wanting to be with her. So this is a friends to lover romance, and this was actually really cute. Like, it made me feel like I wanted someone like that in my life, that really cared just that much to want to get me back in the holiday spirit. Not that I've lost my holiday spirit, but would care enough to do the things that he did, and taking her down memory lane and doing all these things that she loved in order to help her realize that she needed to get back into the holiday spirit, and that was who she was as a person. It was just really cute. There wasn't exactly a whole bunch to it, but the dates that he took her on and just watching their romance grow is something that I really did enjoy. And the last Nicole Falls book that I read this month was All I Want for Christmas, and this is actually, it's a standalone, I believe, but not really, because this is a follow-up to Sugar Butter Flower Love. It's a couple that we see in the first book that we see. They get their own romance book, and I'm kind of hesitant to really talk about this one because I don't want to spoil any elements of Sugar Butter Flower Love. But I will say that this one literally starts off with a bang. This is a second chance romance because our 2 main characters were dating in high school, took a break, and then they start dating again. We do get to see characters from the first book in this one. The next book that I have on this list is Yamada-kun and the Seven Witches, Volume 1 by Miki Yoshikawa. And this one is about a young man by the name of Yamada who figures out that he has special powers in which he can switch bodies with another character when they kiss. So this is really just about their experience swapping bodies, and they help each other out. And what I like about this one is, like, it's an undertone of romance. I think that the 2 of them are really interested in each other, and they use the need to switch bodies as an excuse for them to kiss each other. And it's really cute. And there are different people, I think, that are going to start to find out that they have this ability, or that Yamada has this ability to switch bodies with individuals that he is kissing. And it was just fun. It's over the top. There is a little bit of fan service in this one, not a little bit, but I really am enjoying it. This one, I started reading this one in Comixology as well, and this one I believe is a little over 25 volumes maybe, but I'm hoping to read a good portion of it this year. The next one that I ended up reading was That Wolf Boy Is Mine by Yoki Nogiri, and this one is another manga that I read a lot of manga, but this is another manga that I ended up reading, which is kind of akin to Fruits Basket. So this one actually came out after Fruits Basket. A lot of people have said that if you enjoyed that series, then you actually might enjoy this series if you're looking for more of that same theme, because it is a young girl who ends up leaving her old school because she gets bullied, and she moves in with her dad, and she ends up attending the school, and she becomes friends with these boys who are apparently like the hot ticket item at their high school, and they have this huge secret which includes them switching into various animal creatures, and she really gets to know them. And one of the boys tells her, like, do not fall in love with this other character, and that's the guideline that she has to follow. So I really enjoyed the first volume. This is a short manga series. There's only 4 volumes, so I'm really interested to see what the mangaka has done with with this entire story in 4 volumes because I flew through the first one and I have the second one on my Kindle that I purchased as a ebook copy. So we'll see what happens, and I know that I'm going to end up probably finishing this one this year. The next one that I have is a book actually that does not come out until the 19th of this month, and that is The Comeback by E.L. Shen. This is a middle grade novel that focuses on the main character Maxine's experience as a figure skater and also the racism that she faces in school. So this one definitely has trigger warnings for racial slurs used on page, racism, bullying, and general ups and downs that just are associated with childhood relationships. Maxine is a figure skater, like I said, and she loves figure skating, and she is looking forward to possibly making it from sectionals to regionals to nationals, and then nationals could possibly lead to Olympics. I think that's the way that it goes in Olympics, if not Olympics. I think that's the way that it goes in figure skating in order to get to the Olympics, if I'm remembering it right. So when I read this, I was very much so like, this reminds me of Ice Princess, and come to find out E.L. Shen was really inspired to write a novel like this after watching Ice Princess. And this one is very good because she does write the novel in a way that if you're not familiar with the terms, or if you're not familiar with the process of going to the Olympics from ice skating, then she writes it in a way that's truly accessible for people who have just no understanding of the terminology and stuff like that. But I think the highlighting points of this was really just the conversations of what it is like to be a Asian individual living in predominantly white spaces, because the town that Maxine lives in is predominantly white, and she definitely feels, I don't want to say the pressure, but I think this is a word that's coming to me right now. She feels the pressure of being the only Asian individual outside of her parents that lives in this community, and it's very hard on her. And there's a particular student in the school that bullies her a lot, and it was really rough, like reading some of the parts of this book, because there are racial slurs that are used on page, and I think that Maxine tries very hard to move past it and to ignore it, but there are some other factors that are in there that kind of prevent her from doing so. There's a great emphasis on childhood relationships, the loss and the gaining of childhood relationships, and I really like that, because while Maxine loses one relationship, she gains another in an unexpected way, which I thought was really great. And they really support each other, and I like the support that Maxine's parents show to her, because of course figure skating, I think a lot of people don't realize sometimes that figure skating is a very intensive sport, and I think that a lot of times as parents, like speaking myself as a parent, we always want the best for our kids, and sometimes that leads into overworking or overexerting our children past the point that they don't even want to do said thing anymore. And what I loved about Maxine's parents is that they always remind her, like, this is for fun, we're glad you enjoy it, but if you ever get tired, if you ever get stressed, you don't have to keep doing this. And I think a lot of times, like, a lot more parents need to be like that, because I think that we often get into the trap of trying to build our children to be like us, and we want the best for them, but sometimes it's more of a hindrance than a help, and you have to allow them to blossom and grow to be their own people, build them to be the best people that they will be, not the best versions of us. And her parents definitely have that style of thinking where they want her to be the best person that she can be, and there were some scenes in which they had to explain to her like the impact of racism on them as children and as adults. That was very heartbreaking, having to have that conversation, because for me as a parent, I am very nervous about possibly having to have, and not possibly, because I'm going to have that conversation with my daughter, and I could feel how nervous and how difficult that conversation was for her parents, and I imagine it will be like the same for me as well. But definitely a great read. If you're looking for a new middle grade book to try out, I highly recommend that one. So the next book that I read was actually a part of a reading thing that I am doing for Patreon. So if you're at a certain tier on my Patreon, you get the opportunity to have me exclusively review a book for you, and this is one of the books that I had to read in December, and that was Get a Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which everyone has read, so I don't really need to give any type of explanation about this book whatsoever. It was very much so, like, it was well done. I really did enjoy the romance between Chloe and Red. I like the representation and the diversity and the conversation that Talia Hibbert had. There was a great point at which Red had to grovel, and I'm glad that Chloe kind of stood her ground on some certain things, but it was definitely two individuals who are learning a lot about each other and their experiences and finding their romance that worked for them. And I know that a lot of people have really enjoyed this book because of the representation of chronic pain, and I got to see that for the first time, and I really appreciated it as someone who does not suffer from chronic pain. So overall, just a well-written book, and I will be filming my review for the patron that selected this book soon. Next, I have Moth to Flame by Ashley Antoinette. So I was interested in reading the Ethics series by Ashley Antoinette, and then well, it actually started off where I wanted to read the Butterfly series by Ashley Antoinette, but then everybody was telling me that I needed to read Ethic first, and then I found out that I should have read this one first before I read Ethic. So this is where we all started, and Moth to Flame is a crazy book. So I've read Ashley Antoinette before. I read the Cartel series that she did with Jaquavis Coleman, and this one specifically focuses on a young girl by the name of Raven who's living in Flint, Michigan with her family, and her dad is this huge guy in the drug arena, and basically they are spoiled rotten. She has no knowledge of the game, and she gets picked up by this older guy who clearly is very much so into infiltrating this power that her father has. And she's young, she's naive, she doesn't listen, and she ends up essentially in an abusive relationship. So I will say that this does have content warnings for death, violence, abuse, miscarriage, drugs, and strong language. And this book was just really good because of the fact that it was fast-paced and crazy with so many different twists and turns. And it's so crazy to the point that I have to be very careful about what I say outside of the summary that I just gave you. But Ashley Antoinette is an amazing author in general, a very good author if you're looking for street lit, which is a subgenre that I will be talking about a lot more on my channel this year. But reading this one was a heck of an experience. I read this book in 24 hours, and it was a heck of a ride. Like, I did not see a lot of it coming in. I do think that there was a few writing, like technical issues that I couldn't look past. It was a writing style that Ashley Antoinette used that kind of gave this invasive thought process. Like, the narrator was almost invading the story, which broke the flow of the story a little bit. I don't know how to explain it because I don't know what the technical term for it is, but it's like an omnipresent voice that was telling you stuff instead of showing you stuff, and that bothered me a little bit. And then I talked to Deidre about it too, and we were just talking about how there's plot holes. Like, some things don't really add up, but it was plot holes for the sake of creating this crazy ending and twist, and you kind of look past some of that stuff all in all because the book is just that good. But that's the reason why I ended up rating it 4 stars. But I'm super excited to read Ethic. Now I understand why Ethic exists and why it's called Ethic. So yeah, if you want to read the Ethic series, make sure you read Moth to a Flame first, and then after you read the Ethic series, read Butterfly. Next on this list, I have All Systems Red by Martha Wells, and this is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. If you want to know more about my thoughts of this book, make sure you check out that reading vlog that I talked about before. And the last one that I have in this category is Black Butler Volume 2. So this volume really pushed me to pick up volumes 3, 4, and 5 because this has a Jack the Ripper element to it, and the ending of this one was stupid crazy. I was not expecting the identity of the Jack the Ripper to be revealed, and then when it was revealed and you figure out who it was absolutely bonkers. The middle of this is a little heavy in terms of like dialogue and just info dumping in some places, but the ending was crazy. If you have not read Black Butler, definitely check it out. Remember, it's about a young boy who is I guess kind of like the owner of this toy company, and he has a butler, and the butler is actually a demon. and it's very, very fascinating. So I'm excited to pick up the next volume. This was so good and it's such a quick read. So come to find out, y'all, I think my numbers might be off just a little bit because I forgot to include a whole book in all of my stats and everything. So I think I actually read 43 books this month. So whatever. At this point, I just could care less. I could care less. I really could care less at this point. But in my category of 4.5 stars, the first book that I have here is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. I have talked about this one as well in my reading vlog, so make sure you check that out. And the last one that I have in this category is Would I Lie to the Duke by Eva Lee. This is the second book in the Union of the Rake series. This one focuses on two main characters by the name of Jess and Noel. And this is an interesting one because Jess ends up changing her identity because she has a family company that's about to go under, and she poses as a lady of society in order to help refinance her company. And that's when she meets Noel, and of course they end up becoming interested in each other. But it is this issue where we have her lying the entire time, and it's understandable why she does, but at the same time not, because she's lying. And it was a book where I had to see a heroine grovel, which I'm not used to seeing as frequently, and I really enjoyed it. But this book was just, it was gold. It was chef's kiss, and it was so freaking hot. I will never forget the line where Jess says to Noel, "Get on your knees and receive your penance." Oh, the most iconic line of 2020 for me. Get on your knees and receive your penance. I will use that in my real life one day. I promise you I will. Because it just, oh, so for me, it was reading a historical where our hero was actually in a subservient position. And it was so good. It was so good. I read the first one and it was good. I think my fake rake, I think I gave that one 4 stars. But Would I Lie to the Duke? So good. It was so good. It was so good. And I did not finish this one before I actually recorded my top romances of 2020. And it's okay, because I think this one is going to be my top book of 2020. Granted, that video is coming out after this one, so you'll know for sure whether this one actually ends up making the list. But it was so well written and so done. I love the romance. I love the sexual tension. I just love the dialogue. I love the banter. Oh, this book was so good. It was such a good book. So I'm hoping that the third book, which I believe comes out this year, I can't remember if it's in February or June, can't remember, it's one of those 2 months, but the third book comes out this month or this year, and I am hoping that it is just as good as this one, because just so you know, I did actually end up getting another Eva Lee book. It's on the way because she's just great. Like, she's really good. Okay, so on to the 5 stars, and we are completely done. I think that this video is probably going to be at least an hour and a half of just raw footage, so I'm about done myself, to be quite honest with you. So the first 5-star that I have on my list is Runaway: The Daring Escape of Ona Judge, and this was a picture book that I read for review, and it's about Ona Judge, who actually was enslaved by the Washingtons, and she specifically had to work for Martha Washington, and she made the decision to leave. And this picture book is really cool because what it does is it slowly creates this dichotomy between, like, oh, if slaves were well treated, then why did they have a problem? And it's the fact that slaves were human beings. No matter how good you're treated, you don't want to be enslaved by someone, because you lose your own rights to do as you please, to move freely, to be able to do things that you want to do. So I love that the author Ray Anthony Shepard actually took the opportunity to create this alternating dialogue where he questions, like, well, if you're treated well, then why did you decide to run? And then answers that question with, you know, even well treated, quote unquote, and I say that in high bolded quotation marks. slave still wasn't treated as a human being. So, you know, just very, very good. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm interested in checking out some other books by this writer. I haven't read anything else by him, but I was excited that I was able to review this one, and it ended up being very, 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 very good. And the artwork is chef's kiss. If you've never heard of Ona Judge, I definitely would recommend starting out with this book and then doing a little research on your own. So I'm going to interrupt my 5-star reads to actually talk about a 4-star book that I forgot, which is A Wealth of Pigeons, a cartoon collection by Harry Bliss and Steve Martin. This is a small comic collection, or yeah, it's cartoons. It's really cartoons. Like, I think cartoon comic strips that you see like in newspapers. So like one panel. This was really, really easy to make it through. There were some of these that were really, really funny, others that I just thought were okay, but overall an interesting collection, like I said, that I ended up giving 4 stars to. The next 5-star read that I have is Parachutes by Kelly Yang. I have given every Kelly Yang book that I have read 5 freaking stars. 5 stars. Hands down. I will read anything that Kelly Yang produces at this point because she has not disappointed me yet. So this focuses on 2 characters, Claire, who is actually living in China, and her family decides to send her off abroad to the United States, and the other individual is Danny, and Danny is already living in the United States attending school. So Claire actually ends up living with Danny, and Danny is a part of her host family. And this is, first of all, this is a chunky book. It's almost 500 pages, and I think the huge misconception about this one, like with the cover, is that this is going to be something like a YA version of Crazy Rich Asians, and it's not. There is a conversation about wealth in here, but this is a heavy book. So we're getting 2 different narratives because Danny and Claire are like not friends really when they first meet, and we get their stories like converging on each other towards the end of the book, but how they converge is what's so heartbreaking about it. And I will go ahead and tell you that there is 2 major trigger warnings for this book. I mean, outside of like racism, racial slurs on page, and underage drinking and parental affairs, this book definitely has strong trigger warnings for rape and predatory behavior. Rape by a student that is the same age as Claire and Danny, and predatory behavior by a trusted adult coach. So keep that in mind if you decide to pick up this book. But this one was one that even I had to kind of stop sometimes because I was very much shocked about a lot of things that happened, but I did not know how Kelly Yang was inspired to write this story, and you find out why and how she was inspired to write this story by her author's note, and that in itself is super heartbreaking. But you get to see how these students are treated going to these schools, and how simple things like they're assumed that they can't read, that they can't write, that they don't know math, and they have to test out of their classes, how teachers are racist towards them. This deals a lot with silencing victims of rape and sexual assault and predatory behavior, and how communities do that, how people in power, especially adults in power, and even parents are willing to silence victims to save their own reputations. And it's really, really sad. It's super, super heartbreaking because stuff like this happens all the time, and how race plays a big role into a lot of this, and how women of color, and specifically BIPOC women, are less likely to be believed when it comes to instances of rape and sexual assault than their white counterparts. And you see this on page. You see this where you have people who try to justify and gaslight these girls into believing that the situations that they're involved with are their fault. And that's what makes the book so difficult to read, because they really do have to start to rely on each other, and they have to truly do a lot of self-exploration and find the courage to stand up for themselves when everyone around them just refuses to do so. There's a lot of conversation about sexuality and sexual identity in this book, especially in Asian communities, and it is just, there's even this conversation about the safety of students with host families and how these host families will try to take advantage of these young kids because of the fact that they come from a different country. So there's a lot to dissect and talk about in Parachutes, and this is one that I do want to reread this year because I feel like this is one where I want to explore more and learn more, because Kelly Yang just, I never leave a Kelly Yang book without learning more, without wanting to explore more about especially experiences within the Asian community. While I know that every experience in the Asian community is not the same, because we have people who identify differently within that community. The same way I look at the Black community is not a monolith. I know the Asian community is not a monolith either, but I really do like what she does, especially her conversations about like Chinese American experiences and how they have been as a community impacted by the way that they're treated here in the US. So there is a lot that can be covered. This is not, I really think that this cover is just super misleading. I mean, it is funny and lighthearted in some parts, but this definitely does cover some tough topics, especially topics that directly impacted Kelly Yang herself. So if you've never heard of Parachutes, I implore you to pick it up. If you've never heard of Kelly Yang, what are you doing? The next one that I have on here is Dr. Stone by Richiro Inagaki. And I was very surprised by this. So Dr. Stone was one that I randomly picked up because it's one that I had been hearing about, but I didn't really do much reading, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna really like this one. But Dr. Stone is essentially about this entire community of people, the entire world actually, where there's this huge blast and then everyone turns into stone. And then two of our main characters in this book actually, or this manga, actually end up somehow figuring out how to get out of the stone, and they are responsible for restarting civilization. It is so good. I was so surprised about how much I enjoyed this, and this is science heavy, so there's a lot of explanation about how science works and how they're going to get this community restarted. But there's also this question of morality and ethics, and when you have the responsibility of restarting civilization, are you really allowed to choose who lives and who doesn't get to live based off of what they did in their life while they were on Earth? And that is a huge question in this first volume, and I'm sure it continues in the rest of the volumes because it's a huge plot point for this manga. But I enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to pick up volumes 2, 3, and more because it is so good. I know that there's an anime. I haven't watched it yet, but trust me, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Then we have Completely Stuffed by Ashley Nicole, and this is the follow-up to the one that I was talking about earlier. And this follows our two characters as they re-meet after their one-night stand, and this was just really cute. Like, the romance in this one was chef's kiss. I really enjoy this novella because we get to explore them questioning what happened during that Thanksgiving and why they may or may not be interested in each other because they both have separate, I don't want to say issues, but they both have separate things going into this kind of sort of relationship, and they want to figure out if they're compatible with each other. And this book is hilarious. There is a scene that specifically deals with chitlins that I will never ever get over because it was so funny. It had me crying, laughing, tears, and it was phenomenal. I really loved it. I still want more about this couple, so if Ashley Nicole ever sees this video, I really want her to write just one more. I just need one more about these two because they're so great. And I found out that this is the first, like, this is one of many books about the Mason family. So yes, excited. And the last book that I have on my 5-star read list is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is one that I also talked about in that vlog. So go ahead and check the vlog out if you want to know more of my thoughts about this one. Okay, y'all, so I promise you, guess what? I will never ever do this again because this video is not only super long, and it took me a very long time to film, more than what you'll see in this final footage, and then also the editing process. So with that being said, I don't know what I'm gonna do now in the future. This is my question to you if you've made it this far in this video. If I continue to read this many books a month, would you want to see me do weekly reviews, or would you like me just to stick to my mid-month and final wrap-up? It will always be 2 parts now, but I wonder if I start reading enough, if I should start switching over to doing weekly reviews, because this is going to end up being a lot. And some of these reviews, I felt myself kind of like cutting myself off because this video is already super long and my battery has already died twice during this filming process. So let me know in the comments which method you would prefer. If I continue to push out, you know, 30 to 50 books a month, like, would you be interested in seeing a weekly wrap up? So yeah, like I said, let me know in the comment box below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you've made it this far, I truly appreciate you. I really do. If you're interested in supporting my channel, all the description links will be down in all the links will be down in the description box below. And if you're interested in following me on social media, all the links will be down in the description box below as well. And I'll be back with another video soon. Bye, y'all.